Ted, thanks so much for joining us. Can you give us a quick introduction as to who Ted is?
So 32 years, very focused on refrigeration and air conditioning, former chemical engineer, that's my training, but really captivated by the challenge in the HVACR space. And when I started, it was around refrigerant recycling, thinking that was going to be a short horizon to solve. And along the way, there were underpinnings that challenged the industry that weren't being solved. So I've moved through those solutions. My last venture was TrackRef. Sold that to FEXA with the intention of making it a simpler process for people to stay engaged with compliance and HVACR management. But that didn't finish the journey. There's still a lot more to solving this journey. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface, but there's a lot interesting pieces left that I want to participate in.
Okay, you've been at this a long time, and I think we'll start at the net zero element, because we've obviously known each other for a long time, and I know your background, but for other people's benefit, you've been tackling net zero issues or trying to achieve net zero since what, 2007?
No, 1997. Really?
And there's two sides of that, right? There's the refrigerant leakage at angle, which is particularly impactful around HVAC refrigeration. There's just energy consumption, and both are, a lot of times we think of net zero as reduce your energy consumption, but the refrigerant side is actually maybe as important. Or
97 was an interesting inflection year because you didn't know the impact from refrigerants. Right. There was a global warming potential to each of these materials, but until 97, we had only paid attention to the ozone depleting potential. Right. And so we were really scoring refrigerants with only one aspect of a multi-aspect impact. And so in 97, the Department of Energy had a program called 1605B, and we had refrigerants added to the 1605B inventory. There was a first time that a global warming potential was now part of the metric for measuring refrigerants. And DOE led that program up, which ultimately ended in roughly 2002.
Right.
So it was a beginning. It was an important beginning.
Okay, it's clear you've been working on it for a long time. Why can't companies get it right in 2025?
Well, go back on that a little bit to what we're measuring along the way, right? If you had measured this number in 1987, you wouldn't have had refrigerants on your chart or even known the energy impact, right? But also, rooftops were very different. On a roof in 1987, even 1995, a roof would have two big units on it, cooling the whole building. And it didn't matter what building, you had a primary and a secondary. But around 95, as regulations started to change, people started to put more equipment on the roof. 20 units, 30 units, 40 units. But we defined it in terms of tons of cooling, not number of units. So oftentimes you would look at a design on a building and say, oh, that's got 400 tons or 1,000 tons of cooling. But you didn't know how many units that comprised because you only spec'd the tons of cooling in the design build, not what you would actually get out at the end. And so what ended up happening is in 2007 measurement numbers, you might be looking at a narrow spectrum of your building. An example is you might say, well, here's my energy bill. This is my global warming potential, my greenhouse gas impact. This is my CO2 impact. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait, there's a scope 1 emission. I mean, we didn't have something called a scope 1 emission that was broadly used in 2007. Those are late 2019, I'd say post 2014 before we started to see scope 1, 2, and 3. I remember my first meeting in sometime around 2012 where scope 1, 2, and 3 were addressed. And people were like, yeah, just throw refrigerants into that scope 1. It makes sense. But nobody knew what that meant. So they would say, yeah, here's my emission number. It was a fictitious number, not intentionally fictitious. They just didn't have it. So as we get better measurement and better science and better metrics, now our numbers look worse. I remember the very first time working with somebody and they said, I'm not sure working with you is a great idea. My emission rate with you went up, not down. And I'm like, no, it's your reported emission number went up, but your actual emission number is going down. You just didn't report it before because you didn't know it. And even today, if you look at scope 1, 2 emission numbers, roughly refrigerants make up about 55 to 57% of scope 1 emission. Most people are reporting 7-8%.
And that's the global warming potential, like HFCs, which are the common current. We had the phase out you mentioned from CFCs to HFCs. the global warming potential of 1 unit of HFC is much more damaging to global warming or to climate change than a unit of carbon.
Correct.
It's kind of the core. It's like hundreds or even.
Oh, no, it's
Yeah,
tons.
because-
Yeah, we measure it in tons. So
Yeah.
1 pound of refrigerant is 1 ton of carbon. And so you get big numbers very quick.
Yeah.
And it accelerates. If you use a prescriptive versus a performance number, most companies use a prescriptive number. That will accelerate your emission because you're using a 2007 IPCC factor.
Yeah.
Even the EPA's website has a 2007 IPCC factor.
Right.
Before we knew what these factors would look like. So
Yeah.
a lot of these companies are like, oh, we're just adopting this. That factor is 18 years old. It needs to evolve a little bit. And I actually think it'll go higher when it does evolve. But we're not keeping up and informing people early enough. And so it looks like our numbers are higher. They're really not. We're just better at reporting and record keeping. I think Walmart's done an amazing job. Dollar Tree has done an amazing job. And what they're doing is they're looking at this holistically, and their numbers might look higher. But now it's putting pressure on their peers who aren't reporting as well to pay attention to those same scoping goals.
From where I sit, and over the last couple of years, refrigerants, it's definitely been talked about more, maybe because I'm starting to get into that space more, but it still seems like it's almost an afterthought. It's not as shiny a topic as some of the other topics out there. Like, outside of regulations, what needs to change in the industry for refrigerants to be seen as like, we have to solve this quickly?
The EPA has the AIM Act that was signed into place in 2020. So what that's doing is it's putting inventory limits on the industry. And in rough numbers, in 2019 or 2000, we were using about 600 million pounds of refrigerant in the United States annually. And these restrictions go into place. And what they don't tell you what refrigerants they're going to restrict, but they put an inventory cap on what can be consumed. That's 40% below the 2012, 2014 period. So that means, let's say we went from 600 million in pounds. Now the product mix can change, but now technically when you get down 40%, you drop 240 million pounds, you're down to 360 million pounds. All the average consumer sees is the price go up. But the reality of it is it's creating shortages. And we saw this last year with the 454B rollout across the whole industry. People couldn't get access to equipment because there wasn't enough 454B. Manufacturers shifted their pre-regulatory inventory from non-proprietary products like 410 and 134 to proprietary products like 454B, which then took the 410 inventory, like stockpile, out, and they had to shift pretty quickly to get this done. So are people feeling it? They are. They just don't know why they're feeling it.
Interesting.
But that's what's actually happening.
It's interesting because the one market development, Honeywell has spun out its advanced materials business, Solstice, and they're one of, if not the largest supplier of refrigerants. They do other things as well.
Largest.
It's like they're the largest. Yeah. So, and it's interesting. That's just a completely independent business now. More, I think, the motivation there is just Honeywell becoming, as I call in my newsletter, deconglomeration at work, right? These companies have a lot of different units. They're conglomerates. They're becoming less of conglomerates.
Without being too controversial,
Please.
Please.
I'll just say there's probably a very good reason that Honeywell spun that out.
Yeah.
Producer liability in Europe around PFAS is sending shockwaves through manufacturers, and they don't want that long-term liability. So spin it out, make it a separate group, and then let that survive or die on its own. But you've taken the value out of that in the spin-off. And PFAS is another one that we don't talk a lot about in the United States, but refrigerants are in that PFAS bucket. Very important. I'm not saying it's a reason to make a shift. I'm just saying you can't ignore it when you're measuring the risk against these materials on your balance. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
With what you're doing right now and just in general, where would you say this space is, and what tends to frustrate you most about the space?
I think sometimes people posture around their policy for the wrong reason. Refrigerants, when they're left in their systems, are an incredibly useful material. We need to keep food cold. Let's face it, in the recent update at EPA, data centers got a huge regulatory pass. Given what some would term wartime privileges to build data centers at any cost. And there's a reason for that. We need this data and food safety and comfort. No one would live in Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, or the southern states if it weren't for great air conditioning. And name somebody that doesn't own a car with air conditioning. We all do. And so these things are really important. What's happening, I think if there's a frustration, it's that we make the assumption that somebody else is going to solve this for us. And that we don't have to be part of that solution. And everybody can have a hand in that a little bit. Every property owner, every investor. And I think Scope 1 and 2 emission reporting in the SB 253, SB 219.
Those are California? Yeah. Okay.
Those are going to have a really powerful, much more powerful than the regulatory exposure, impact on this industry in a very short period of time.
Okay, so staying on the theme of refrigerants, from a technology standpoint, do we have the right technology to solve some of the biggest issues right now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We do. Yeah, no, the technology's out there. The money's out there.
So what's missing?
One of the biggest things is people. The industry's short. We don't have enough mechanical tradespeople. We don't use our data well to predict outcomes. And we have all these terrific fault detection and diagnostics tools. But the FDD people, they're emphasizing a lot of things around energy. And I've heard, some of the stuff that you guys are doing. There's a lot in the operational world that could be done using that same data.
Here's a point I've heard on that note. So you could look at what is the ROI of an analytics platform, which could be FDD Plus. Yeah. What I've heard, one, it's easier to quantify energy savings, which I think is true. But the other nuanced point I've heard is if I'm trying to buy one of these solutions as a owner of buildings, an operator of buildings, I may have trouble getting budget approval unless I can point to energy. If I say we're going to save staff time, the finance department says, I don't really believe that. I believe energy savings. I don't believe that. And that leans everything into, let's just quantify it as energy savings. But I agree with you. You're probably leaving money on the table, quote unquote, because there's a lot of other value.
Well, and I'll add on to that.
Yeah.
There's a really smart guy out there in the sustainability space named Tim Moen. Great guy. And he framed this pretty well about a year ago, or not even a year ago, the winter. Resilience. Building resilience in a building is critical. And that resilience encapsulates energy, but also people. Like, if there's not enough people to solve the problem, then you need to use energy to leverage those people to get them more focused on the actual problem, not the one that you're treating today, right? Like, you're treating a symptom today in a building. We have to get to the point where we're leveraging this data to solve the problem on the performance of the system. And the performance has an energy attribute, food safety, data center performance. I can't tell you how many times I've been called in to evaluate performance in a data center, and the secondary or third system in the data center doesn't function at all. And they're happy to just say, oh, well, the primary's working. We'll get to that secondary and third phase support later. That's not resilience. That means that data center is incredibly vulnerable. And so there's a lot of that. Or a building that has an occupancy issue, or food safety, like they overstock a food aisle. I mean, I know it sounds crazy.
Lose some to spoilage.
And so this food safety issue becomes a really big deal.
So instead of avoiding the spoilage issue, just have backup.
Or not even a backup, or have the data to tell you, hey, you're overstocking that cabinet in a very short period of time. Literally, I just did a study the other day where we analyzed stocking produce in the middle of the day. And what we found was they're overstocking it because they have the labor at that time to do it. If they had just spread the labor out, stocked part of it now and part of it later, they would have less spoilage of that food product. It's a really important thing, but the question is, who's reading this data? Not only do we have a shortage in the mechanical manpower, but we have a shortage in the manpower reading the...
My sense is, you make great points, Ted. My sense, you hear, like, food spoilage is a really interesting one, because if you're a seller of food, your margins are very small. So throwing away anything actually does have a big impact on just your overall financial health. I always hear anecdotes of, oh, there was a hurricane, power went out, we were able to monitor remotely the refrigerant system, the freezers, the cold storage, we were able to actually keep a bunch of food, whereas had we not had that connection and that visibility and that data, to your point, we wouldn't have known and we would have to throw everything away. But it still feels to me very anecdotal. Like, it's not an industry-wide, you must do this, you must do that. Much like there are certain things in industries where everyone's doing this now.
There's not enough manpower, whether it's a grocer or a food retailer of any kind or a cold chain company.
Well, I mean, just broadly speaking, like if you think about trades, like refrigerant, it's a very technical niche part of the space.
It can seem very niche-y. It touches a lot of different points, and it's the canary in the gold mine for the impact.
Yeah.
And these leaks or these food safety issues, we're managing by exception. So we have a hurricane, we know to keep our eyes on that store and monitor it. But when you have 1,000 of these locations or 400 or 300, you don't know which one to look at first because they all red lighting you. And you have to drill into that red light and figure out, is this a true red light or is this yellow? How do I accommodate that risk?
Yeah. One of the things underneath all the points you're making, there's a shortage of labor. There's a bit of a chaos almost of we're just trying to get by and do what we need to do. And no one is stepping back and saying, should we think about doing this a different way to utilize the fact that we have now more data, but fewer people, but augmenting or putting those together? Do you think that's part of the core problem, or no one is taking a step back and saying, we should be doing this a completely different way?
No, they do. They're trying. They really are. The challenge they have is a lot of the solutions they're buying aren't as complete as the ones they need. And if they do buy a solution, who's going to manage it? You know, and the solution providers are software centric, but not service centric. And the service providers, it's usually not a complete ecosystem. So let's say you have service provider A, and you could say to them, I want you to watch this whole building. Provider A might not have complete control over the whole building. They might be your primary, but then you have a secondary, and they don't have that kind of control or access. So it's going to take a shifting in responsibilities.
I think something we've spoken about off air is that a lot of technology today is built and sold to building owners, but needs to be built and for the actual end user, like the trades, the technicians in the field.
We build it for all the smart people who have access to these display screens, their desk, and nice dashboards, and they can go get coffee at a machine. You know what it's like to be a tech? You have to find like a good McDonald's to go to the bathroom. You're not exactly sitting in a really comfortable environment to be reading this data from. You're in your truck and your screen doesn't load, or you're like, I get too much data, but not the right data. It's really not an easy challenge. So I think if you created a hub and spoke relationship where you have a centralized team of experts that could inform the external people, and you create like a symbiotic engagement of data and mechanical interaction, that shows some merit. I've seen it work, but it takes a much bigger investment than just buying software. You have to buy software, staff a team. I will say your software spend to team spend is 7 to 1. You're going to spend 7 times more money expanding that team than on that software. And so you don't just buy the software, you have to buy everything that goes with it. Or you're not going to get what you need out of it.
What would you buy with it?
You'd buy those services, people that I mentioned to you.
Like the bolt-ons.
Yeah, you'd get all those things that you have that I've referenced, like HVAC tech, refrigeration tech, an electrician, a plumber, an energy person, a controls person, a multiple controls people, because we're not working with one vintage of equipment. We're working in all these cases. We've got decades of technology that's out there, and you got to build for that. And it's going to take not 1 year. You buy something, you come back at the end of the year and go, how do we do? We made 5% incremental improvement. And is 5 good? No, 5's terrible. We wanted 50. All right, well, next year. And you have to go on a 3-year journey. You know, this is not an overnight thing. Most people don't even know their assets.
It's like an asset registry.
Correct, they're all terrible. Or they're dated.
In terms of the value, does that lie with the building owners, the people buying the technology, or is that the tech vendors selling it? They're not delivering the right message. We're not going to be able to save you 30% in your first year, but over 3 years, you may save 15 to 20.
There's a lot of fatigue around this ROI concept.
There's a lot of fatigue everywhere.
People are like, haven't I heard this 20 or 30%? I could almost do the presentation for any tech stack company selling into a space. It starts with the slide about how great the tech is. It transitions to a slide about the 30% ROI, and then it shows 4 representations of how that was delivered. Well, that's like suggesting that you can have the best eggs in the world, but it's not going to make a cake. You got to have flour, a good oven. There's all these other ingredients. The eggs alone, thank you, great. Tell me about the other ingredients I need. Or work with an integrator, or Are you going to be a do-it-yourself integrator? Because a lot of these companies, that's the expectation, that they're going to do it themselves. Were they told that? Or, hey, we have a great solution. Very few people have the chops when they're selling something, or even the responsibility to be a little bit more human about this, to talk about the other things that people need to do in order to deliver that solution.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about AI. We've spoken a bit about efficiency or lack of. What's your just general take on AI?
It's an enhancer or an accelerant, and it can improve things. But I mentioned it a minute ago, we don't even have an adequate asset list. When I do a building audit and I walk through the building, whatever asset registry I've been given to use as a tool as my roadmap is inadequate to inform me on what's happening. So if that's the source of truth, and by the way, it's different for everybody. Mechanical trades companies, when they take on a building, they do an equipment audit. That equipment audit does not reflect the equipment audit that the maintenance system is using to dispatch against. But there's very little alignment on that. I think AI is going to be an enhancing tool to improve this, but we have to agree first on what the problem is. Without that, we're just all solving problems in a silo, and we need to change that.
Well, there's been data, interestingly, like macroeconomic wide, not our industry, all industries, that have said one of the barriers for AI adoption is data readiness. Staff training and readiness is another one, but really the data readiness piece has been identified as a barrier to AI adoption across all industries. And you could argue real estate, facility management tends to be later in the adoption curve, not ahead of the adoption curve when it comes to new technology trends. So you could argue what you're saying aligns with the fact that we'd love to use more AI. Our data isn't ready yet, or we're not organizing our data yet, or we don't have it in a position that's consumable by AI.
We have to solve our less sexy problem. AI is this really sexy term, but it needs a great asset register. AI is going to help us inform techs on what to do, but first we have to know, did the data that we get from the building management system, energy management system, was it on updated drivers? If you ever do a store audit or a facility audit, the number of controllers that are offline or haven't had updated drivers is absolutely shocking. And it undermines the entire possibility of using AI for betterment. And so I think we have to solve these base problems first.
The other interesting data point I saw, I put this in my newsletter maybe 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, but recently there was a report, a real estate outlook report. I forget who published it, but it was one of the big consulting firms. And they noted definitely last year's survey, this year's survey, in terms of where were you at in the adoption. It was just a survey of like basically pick one of these 5 buckets, ahead of the curve, behind the curve. They didn't say it like that. There was a big pullback from last year to this year of just like, I am deploying and using and getting value out of AI. And there were many more people who said, I'm interested in researching. And I thought that kind of fits in with this other theme of maybe you were very bullish on AI and then you realize, wait, my data is not clean enough to use it. Okay, I have to go back to square one or back a couple steps. So it kind of aligns with the same points you're making.
In almost all situations when I see an FTD solution start, the momentum to go into place, the underpinnings aren't addressed in the sales cycle. Like the question doesn't get asked. What's the quality of your data registry? When was the last time you updated drivers? Have you done a digital audit of your facility? And when I usually get called in at the end of these things where this isn't working, Ted, we hate this technology. And usually not a technology issue. It's a basic, guys, you have a really bad set of data to start with. And we have to start at this other less sexy place and improve that. And then this can work. But that's universal. And by the way, that's Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 5. This is universal. Or they did an asset audit, and the team that did the asset audit didn't pick the right attributes to choose in the data capture process. So they missed huge chunks of data. So they didn't get a buy-in from the whole group. And then that's lost. And then that leads to failure.
So 2026, if you're a company buying technology or thinking about technology, what are they looking for? What do you think they should be buying where there is genuine, in that first year, 18 months, return on investment?
Yeah, genuine's a great word. I would invest in evaluating your readiness for sharing your data and have it tested. Don't rely on your own internal team to give you a score because they might not be as objective as you want them to be. And you don't have to do it everywhere, but do a representative sample. But verify that data is as good as you need it to be. And then ask your vendors. If you're buying technology, what's the expectation in order to leverage what you're selling me or potentially buying? What are you expecting from me so I can get what I expect from you out of this?
Just to pull something out that you said, like what is expected of me? What is the process on my side? That's a question that's critical, and I don't know that it's asked as much until maybe you're starting to shortlist down to 2 or 3 vendors. You do a pilot, and then you realize, oh, actually, they need all of this information, the vendor, that I didn't know I needed to even provide them, and I wasn't ready for that. And had I known, I would have been ready for that question. I just wanted to pull that out because I think it's a really important point.
You have a lot of projecting in the sales process around what we can do, but not enough about what's the two-way street. How is this going to work so that you can have joint, because you get joint success. Both parties are excited, right? The vendor's excited because now they can go on and tell others about this. And the owner-operator's excited because they just solved a problem and they got what they needed out of the software. A lot of times that disappointment is predicated on a misaligned set of goals or a misunderstanding about what's needed.
Something I wanted to talk a little bit about was compliance. Do you expect any additional regulations coming in for 2026 when you think about refrigeration, or even if we take a step back or zoom out slightly, if you look at Local 97 is soon to be enforced, theoretically, what's your thoughts just generally now?
You know, posturing around policies is probably my favorite like car accident type scene to watch. You know, this, if you could do a reality show, this would be the one. But as it unfolds, what tends to happen is people posture on the defense around regulation. So what they do is they find that line of demarcation and they go, oh, we're going to stay just on the inside of that line. Policy evolution is going to continue to occur. Maybe at the state level for a few years. This is the seesaw that we're watching. Like, we watched this happen 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Policy level at the federal government relaxed, then policy at the state levels grew. And we're going to see your core states like New York, California, Oregon, Washington. They are proffering changes, and those are pretty well established. I think we'll see others do the same. I think we'll see the federal government has never been great at enforcing the regulations, so nobody should posture for regulatory positioning. What I like to remind people is if your entire operational engagement is to create a defensive posture, you're not really paying attention to the whole responsibility that they're intending. Look at what the intention of the regulations are. And the spirit of the regulations is to create better outcomes and behaviors based on some other risk. And in the case of refrigerant and HVAC, we have really big policy structure in Washington that will probably not get the enforcement engagement that you would think. But what it will do is you're going to be limited on the refrigerants you can buy. So you shouldn't be surprised when 410 is in a shortage in 2 years or in 18 months or in 6 months. You should engage your team to lean out a little bit further into that, not to become policy experts, but to balance that policy with good operational outcomes so that you have better operating buildings that are resilient. Going back to that word that Tim used, resilient, I think it's a really important thing. But also so that these teams aren't challenged at the last minute. Like in the state of New York, 494 seemed like it was a roller coaster for operators last year in January. It really wasn't. It was pretty well prescribed outcomes that were happening. And they just put that regulation in place and gave them a little bit shorter time to get ready. It was that train had left the station 2 years early, so it wasn't a surprise. So nobody should be surprised in 2026 or going forward. These are at-risk appliances. We still have a responsibility to deliver cold, comfortable, clean environments. And with that responsibility comes the other responsibility of knowing how those things impact your risk platform. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah.
So we're obviously recording this at FutureBuilt. Is there anything today that you're hoping to see or hear? People you wanted to meet outside of Joe and myself?
Of course. No, I'm an avid watcher of all that you do, so I appreciate it.
With your shackles on, as we've tied you down.
What I hope to come out of FutureBuilt is something so simple that I think everybody in this room could agree on it. And it would be a structured asset taxonomy that every CMMS, energy management system in this room could adopt, so that whether your data is in one product today and another product tomorrow, or you're using two different products to piece together an ecosystem of energy and building management and CMMS. Everyone agrees on the category, type, subtype, and kind, and we can all, as a result, make that data more portable. Even our phones, that we all have the same adapter now. We don't have to like shop for 6 adapters and open up your road kit, right?
Do you think that's a bit of a pipe dream, though?
No, I know. I think it's optimal. Let's put it this way. If this were a pipe dream, all of the environmental regulations that have come out have adopted it. They all have a category, type, subtype, and kind. So if government can agree on it, and let's face it, government can't really agree on a whole lot at times, but if they can adopt something and have it in place, why can't an industry say, hey, I'm going to adopt the FutureBuilt structure for data?
I think just because everyone's almost created their own mini ontology or name tagging for certain things. Like obviously Joe and I, we know Project HVAC and Break Schema very well, but like almost needs something to overarch the industry in general. That's not just building systems, it's like tagging and data infrastructure, the whole thing.
A guy can dream. I've been doing this 33 years.
I hope so as well. I think we just get so much more done.
I agree with you in concept. I think one of the challenges I would identify, and something I've been working on for the newsletter for the future, is the fragmentation in our market. You actually could map out the value chain of facility management or buildings from life cycle design down to end of life. Every level is fragmented, and every stakeholder group is actually fragmented. You look at who's the biggest owner of buildings. We only have like 1%. OEMs, like the biggest OEMs have a lot of share, but there's a lot of small OEMs. Integrators, installers, tens of thousands. So, case things.
What I would say to that is, emerging companies will need this in order to create a smooth platform.
It's true.
Existing companies, as the acquirer of emerging companies, would like to have this uniformity because it would create a better integration for them. But also because a lot of these larger companies they're in their silo, they do great. They have to respect the boundary lines of where that silo will go. Even when I see controller data, the way it's programmed into EMS and BMS systems, and I see the naming conventions that are used for equipment, I'm literally baffled. It's like you have to have like an interpreter to understand what the logic was going into this. I think it's possible. I've seen it work. It works at the government level. I feel like it's possible that it could work here in this ecosystem. And I think I'd rather hear people tell me why it can't work directly and fight that. And I'm willing to go on that fight, on that journey. I've been on it.
I think a lot of people are.
Yeah.
It's just where do you start? And which battle do you choose? Because I think there's just a lot of different associations or organizations trying to do similar things in different ways, different angles. And I think collectively you almost need to figure out how we can join forces.
I think the minute you tell people that we're coming together to do something, they're going to come into that room because they don't want to be left out. And I think you build an ultimatum. In 9 months, whoever's in the room is in agreement. Let's say you get 10 software companies, 10 companies in CMMS, asset management, and you put them all in a room, and they're the only 10 that agree, and the other 100 don't. Well, those 10 now have an adoptable, usable advantage over the hundreds that chose not to. I think that's the win.
True. Yeah. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so let's dive into some quick fire questions. Okay. Ready? Favorite building in the US?
I don't have a favorite building. If I had a favorite building,
your own home?
Monahan train station.
Yeah, I do like that one.
That's a beautiful adaptation of that building.
Yeah, I think it is amazing.
What good coincidence that it was above the trains. I'm assuming they brought mail in by train because it used to be a mail terminal.
It's not only beautiful, there's so many great things in that building, from energy to...
Most overrated tech that you've seen? Category?
FTD.
Interesting. Most underrated?
FTD. I think there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of analytics that come out of FTD, but it's not presented that way. But I think we don't use
There's a lot of data. We were speaking to someone earlier who said a very interesting phrase, which was data is the new gold. And they said it's not the new gold.
I think it's the new dirt. I think data is the new dirt. We have to sift it.
You need to turn it into a diamond, right?
Yeah.
Aren't like fake diamonds made out of coal?
Yeah.
It's like, it's coal, but it could become a diamond.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
One prediction for 2026.
California creates a transformational impact in its reporting responsibilities under SB 253 and 219, and it changes the global reporting horizon. It's a game changer. It is much more powerful than any regulation because it goes beyond the boundaries of any agency power, and it's going to be transformative.
Final one. What would you ban tomorrow if you could?
If I could ban anything, it wouldn't be a thing that I would ban. I would ask people to be more open-minded when they face anything. I don't think we're open-minded enough.
You try coming to the UK, it's worse.
Can it be?
I think this is one of the many reasons I like coming to the US is because there is a general optimism about anything that you could achieve or do. Whereas in the UK, it tends to be fairly reserved, fairly pessimistic. Yeah.
Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Ted, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for some more episodes at FutureBuilt coming over the next couple of weeks.